All right, all right. Happy Friday. Happy Friday. Woohoo! Shout out for the weekend. Welcome everyone to Sabby Sab's show on Revolutionary Blackout Network. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, Twitter, and Twitch. Happy weekend, guys. We made it. I got some cool stories to talk to you about tonight. I want to give shout outs to people in the chat first. Shout out to Dan says which. I assume Dan is speaking of Nancy Pelosi. We'll get into that in just a second. Shout out to Radical Leftist Agenda, who says Pelosi shunning the squad sounds like an act. I agree. Shout out to Eric T. Red says she feeds them. What's going on, Santino says hi, everyone. Shout out to Bryce Smith, who says hey, hey. What's going on, CBC voter says weekend end. Yeah, let's do it. What's going on, Amanda says happy Friday. Greetings, John says, hey, Sabby. Hey, John. Shout out to Lawrence. Always great to see you, says Sabby. What's going on, Savannah says, hello, Sabby. Happy Friday. Hello to you as well. What's going on? Oops, I think I clicked you twice, Amanda. Did I click on you twice? I sure did. Whoopsies. Shout out to Terry, says happy anniversary, RBN. Thank you so much. Greetings, Eric Thomas. Another Eric Thomas? It says, yo. There's two Eric Thomas in this chat, guys. I hope I don't get confused. What's going on, Anthony? Sends a smile. And shout out to Lionel, says happy Ola Friday. That's right. Let's do it. Let's do it. All right, guys. Yes, if you don't know, today is our 1-year anniversary at RBN. I think we're going to try to do some kind of stream later on tonight. I think that'll be at 11:30. But you'll know if we come back on or whatever. But yes, 1-year anniversary. Can't believe it's been a year already. So much has happened. Before I get into the stories tonight, I do want to give a big shout out to Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, New York. This is the one that Chris Smalls used to work at, was working there when the pandemic started. They did just start the first Amazon union in the United States. So that is a huge story. I found out about that probably about a couple hours ago. They were tweeting the counts of the votes on Twitter throughout the day, and it's happening. And this is going to put pressure on other warehouses that Amazon has in the United States. You know, maybe those employees will start looking at each other and say, hey, they just started a union in Staten Island. Maybe we should think about getting together and organizing and starting a union. So this is a huge, huge, big deal. Chris Smalls has done a lot of work. He's been protesting. He's been organizing for. I met Chris Smalls a year ago, and I found out about that because notifications. I realized that it was actually a year ago today when I interviewed Chris Smalls about him organizing the workers at Amazon. So he has been putting in a lot of work. He's been doing this for a long time to try to get the workers what they deserve there. So definitely, if you have the opportunity to do so, if you are on Twitter, please go over and tell @shutdown Amazon. That's his Twitter handle. Please go tell him huge, huge congratulations. This is a big deal. All right. Yeah. Robert says, wow, you and HLM had anniversaries today. Congrats. That's right. So Hardlands Media, today is their 5-year anniversary. So pretty cool day. And no, that's not April Fool's. Yeah, man. Eric Thomas, the other Eric Thomas is right above you. He changed his name to Eric T. Red. All right. What are we talking about tonight? Now, these stories in particular are pretty interesting. Tonight, we're going to talk about Nancy Pelosi shuns the squad. I have new information about that, which I predicted that this would happen. I think most of us did. I think it was the squad who were somewhat delusional about just how far Nancy Pelosi would go for them, right? We're also going to talk about MIT grad students' union fight. Speaking of unions, now, this is a really big one for me. This is really personal to me because I used to work at MIT with grad students there. So I have a lot to say about that story. But let's go ahead and get started with the Pelosi story. So this came through. I want to go ahead and click on this link here. And I want to give a shout out to Alan because he was the one that notified me about this. This was his tweet, and he kind of sent me down the rabbit hole. So here we go. Shout out to Alan Cannon. So he said, Justice Dim sent this email out today. Last week, Nancy Pelosi made it clear, no matter the circumstances, she's backing all of her House incumbents 100%. Did at Justice Democrats slap away the whole force the vote mama bear support? Do they really expect money for the imposters? Now I'm going to click on this here. And I want you to pay close attention to this. Now, this is coming from Madeline Meckelberg. Asked about hashtag Texas 28 runoff. Speaker Pelosi says she is continuing to support incumbent Representative Henry Cuellar. I'm going to get into a story about Henry Cuellar in just a second. I support my incumbents. I support every one of them. When asked about the FBI raid of his home, she says, I haven't seen anything. Have you? Do you know what it's about? Blatant lies there from Nancy Pelosi. I'm pretty sure she knew about that. That was national news on mainstream media. I knew about it, and I don't even work in DC. So I find it strange for her to say that she didn't know about one of her colleagues having their home raided by the FBI. So let's break this down for a second here. In this race in Texas, it was between Cuellar and it's against Jessica Cisneros, right? So Jessica Cisneros, and I've talked about her on this show before. She's a Justice Democrat. I showed you receipts actually last time I talked about her, showing that she is also taking dark money. Now, she's supposed to be the progressive candidate, and she's running against Henry Cuellar. She ran against him before last term. So this is her second time running against him. So neither one of them in my book, if we're looking at the money, neither one of them are great candidates. I'm just going to be honest with you. Henry Cuellar is a conservative Democrat. I don't know if you are familiar with him, but you will be familiar with him when I show you this FBI story. But he is a conservative Democrat. He is pretty much as far to the right as you can be and still claim that you're a Democrat. That's who he is. He does take big money. He takes bad money. And this isn't something that he's shy about. But people continue to vote for him in Texas. Here's the problem. It's not just about this race in particular. That's just an example. Nancy Pelosi is telling everybody, and she's letting the progressives in the House know that she is not going to back any of the progressive candidates that are running. Now, I don't know why they would be surprised by this, because Nancy Pelosi is an establishment Democrat. She supports people like her. And what that says is that once again, we have this split between the progressives in the Democratic Party and the establishment Democrats in the Democratic Party. And this is why putting progressives into the Democratic Party does not work. The Speaker of the House is Nancy Pelosi. They go on to call her Mama Bear. AOC has done interviews where she calls her Mama Bear. She said, oh yeah, that's Mama Bear right there. They've spent all this time kissing up to Nancy Pelosi, trying to befriend Nancy Pelosi. And what does Nancy Pelosi do? She shuts the door in their face and lets them know that nothing is going to change on her end. Meanwhile, the past 2 years, we've watched the squad and other progressives in the House change their policies, change their mind on the issues. We've seen them suppress Medicare for all. Now they're bringing it up again because it's an election year. But last year, they stopped talking about it. They stopped tweeting about it. They didn't want to force the vote. When Cori Bush was questioned about it by Max Blumenthal, Cori Bush went on to say, that's Bernie Sanders and Pramila Jayapal's bill. Now, all of a sudden, that it's an election year. Now, all of a sudden, they're talking about Medicare for all again. And people have started to peep their game, because I'm seeing the comments on Twitter and I'm like, I'm so glad that people are waking up to this. So you have the progressives that are in the House who were willing to change their minds, who were willing to play ball with Nancy Pelosi so that they can get committee assignments, so that they can get along in the Democratic Party. They're willing to make those sacrifices. But the person that they've been kissing up to and trying to befriend is not willing to make any sacrifices when it comes to progressivism. And this should be a red flag for everyone watching this. Because when Nancy Pelosi first went to DC, she was a progressive. She actually was for Medicare for all. A lot of people don't know about this. Man, how things changed. That's what happens when you start to take in that money. Corrupt corporate money. This is a lose-lose situation for the progressives. Because at the end of the day, they have no power. They're not passing any bills. Let's be clear here. What have they done in reference to legislation? They're not passing bills. Can't pass bills, can't get things done. They're not willing to challenge the establishment Democrats. And they ran on that. Some of them, like AOC, have been too busy trying to be a celebrity instead of activism that they used to do, instead of focusing on the issues and challenging these establishment Democrats. And now they find themselves in a lose-lose situation. Because what this tells me right here, and what it should tell you as well, is that Nancy Pelosi and the other Democrats in the House are never going to allow them to put forth their agenda. When they try to, they may push back on it. If it happens to get through, they're not going to vote for it. So to that, I say, then what is the point of having them there? Now, I told you I wanted to show you something about Henry Cuellar. So let's go ahead and get into that. Henry Cuellar is very questionable. If you just joined, I was just telling everyone he is a conservative Democrat. He is far to the right that you can go and still call yourself a Democrat. That's who Henry Cuellar is. Now, Nancy Pelosi, just let you know, she's going to back him, as corrupt as he is. Let me show you what happened to Henry Cuellar. Give me just a second here. So here's the video.
Turn now to some news.
Now, by the way, this raid of his house that happened, this was in January of this year. It's not like this was a couple years ago. This was very recent. Just keep that in mind. So let me share my screen. Doobie-doobie-doo. Very recent, ladies and gentlemen. There's no way that Nancy Pelosi did not know about this. Listen to this.
News out of Texas, where there was an FBI activity, if you will, near the home of Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar yesterday. We do not know the nature of the FBI's investigation, but an FBI spokeswoman did confirm the fact that FBI agents were there. Agents were, quote, present in the vicinity of Cuellar's home in Laredo, conducting court-authorized law enforcement activity. The congressman, who's considered one of the most conservative Democrats in the House and is facing a primary challenge in less than 90 days, mind you, said he will fully cooperate with any investigation. So joining me now to discuss the possible electoral implications of this decision is our justice correspondent, Pete Williams. And Pete, what struck me about this story is, look, we don't know the substance, but March 1 is the Texas Democratic primary, is primary day. He's in a very competitive primary, probably the most competitive that there is on the Democratic side of the aisle in the entire state. And correct me if I'm wrong, I always thought that there was some sort of window to not potentially influence a campaign with law enforcement activity for elected officials. Walk me through that.
So a couple of points. First of all, court-ordered law enforcement activity that's in the FBI statement, that's FBI talk for search warrant. Secondly, so they're definitely conducting a search. And by the way, the U.S. Attorney's Manual says that if somebody's going to search the home of or the property of a member of Congress where documents could be found that relate to legislative activities, they have to get a sign-off from the Justice Department's public integrity section. So Main Justice would have to have signed off on this. Doesn't mean the Attorney General or the Deputy did, but public integrity does. But secondly, you're right, Chuck, there is a policy, but it's not, I think, what many people say. It's not like there's a buffer zone in front of an election during which you can't conduct any law enforcement activity. What these policies say that have been repeatedly articulated by different attorneys general, they always modify them some or somewhat, say that you can't carry out law enforcement activity in order to influence an election. You can't conduct a search. You can't, subpoena somebody in order to affect the election.
So I just want to chime in here for just a second, because I think this is important for people to understand. So what he's explaining to Chuck Todd is that it's not that the rule says that you cannot implement law enforcement during a campaign. What the rule does say is that you can't implement law enforcement in order to influence an election or to influence a campaign. So I just want to make that very clear. And what was interesting also is that it seemed like for a second, Chuck Todd, instead of focusing on the fact that this man's home was raided, which is what he should be focusing on. If the FBI is raiding your home, they have a reason. We're not talking about state law enforcement here. We're talking about the FBI. They had a good reason to be there. Chuck Todd was focused on the rule instead of being focused on the fact that this guy, Henry Cuellar, obviously has done something that has caused the FBI to be brought to his house and to search his house. But his mindset, his focus was on the fact that, oh, but there's this rule in place when someone's, in a campaign year and they're running for election, law enforcement is not supposed to. That's where his focus was. Anyone else find that a bit odd? I'll go back into the video.
It doesn't say you can't do something that would have the peripheral or collateral effect of affecting the election. It doesn't mean law enforcement activity has to stop. I think that's what many people think it says. And in fact, it's different. So as long as the government isn't doing this in order to affect the election, there's nothing that would violate the policy.
Welcome back. This week, the White House proclaimed April as National Sexual Assault Awareness.
Okay. I think that was important for people to see. Now, that was on mainstream media. Chuck Todd reported on it, which Nancy Pelosi has been on his show multiple times. I find it hard to believe that she didn't know about that event. I'm not buying it. Don't have me sold on that one. I'm going to go to some of the comments. Robert Anderson said the progressives in Congress haven't fought or accomplished anything. If they were replaced by centrists, the outcome is the same. Voting progressive doesn't work. Thank you so much, Robert. Joe OWS says Nancy Pelosi's son, Paul, sits at the same Ukrainian pipeline board that Hunter Biden sat on, FYI. Well, well, well. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that special? John says Nancy only took 1 year to come off Medicare for all herself. Yes. Yes, John. Eric Thomas said the last 2 good congressionals we had was Cynthia McKinney and Dennis Kucinich. I hear you on that one. I hear you. Cynthia knew what was up, so she was like, look, this is not working out. I'm going to the Green Party. Greg Bruce, well, they don't need a reason necessarily, but for an establishment Democrat, they do. Ah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Desert Mantis, Sabby, the rabbit ears on her TV broke, so she missed the news. Oh, damn. That's rough. That's rough. Brothwaite, to be called a progressive in Congress, all you have to do is pay a fee. That's what it seems like, huh? Saul said, and Romney's son too, I think. Oh, this is getting interesting. I'm going to have to look into this, you guys. This is getting very, very interesting. So, like I said, they raided his house in January this year. Pretty sure they had reason to be there. Nancy Pelosi can try to pretend like she doesn't know about this all she wants, but it's already been reported on. So there's that. And from what I've seen so far in the polls, it looks like he's going to win again. I mean, Jessica Cisneros, the other option, she takes dark money too. I showed you the receipts. So at this point, it's a lose-lose situation. But I think what this should tell the squad is that at the end of the day, you are not going to be able to change this party. AOC is getting a lot of heat on Twitter. A lot of heat. Because of something that she said about the Amazon union effort that was happening in Staten Island, trying to come in at the end and take credit. I'm going to talk about that on my show tonight. But I really think people are starting to see what is really happening. And I'm noticing more people are starting to call out the squad. And I don't mean just those of us here at RBN, Jimmy Dore, a couple of people that's been doing this for a long time. I'm talking about people who have continued to make excuses for them are now starting to call them out. Kind of late to the game, boo. You're kind of late to the game. When we were doing this and we were calling them out last year, everybody was like, oh, you guys are Red Brown Alliance. You guys are just pessimists. You guys are nihilists. The number of times people call me a nihilist, I was like, why? Because I'm telling you the truth. You want me to lie to the public and have them believe that this is going to work, to have faith in the system still, not point out the inconsistencies that is happening with the squad, what they ran on, what they're fighting for? No, not me. Not me. Anthony is right. The jig is up. That's how it is. That's how it is. That's how it works. Saul, correction. Kerry's son, same Ukraine gas board. John Kerry's son. Well. It's all coming out tonight, ladies and gentlemen. It's all coming out tonight. Salgato said, I'm a nihilist. We're sweet. Oh, Salgato. Rick said, I believe Cisneros worked for Queller before running against him. I was not aware of that. That's interesting, though. That's really interesting. Yes. Thank you so much for this comment. PKL. Calling them out only because of the midterms, they go back to making excuses after November. Right. All right. I'm going to go into my second story because I'm looking at the time here and I do have a lot to say about this story coming up. So for those of you who may not be aware, some of the universities, some of the graduate students at the universities have been trying to start a union. They want a union just like Amazon employees want a union. Now, some of you may hear this and you think, what? Students? They don't need a union. They're students. They're just supposed to go to class. Well, not necessarily. MIT graduate students are fighting for a union. And on a personal note, for those of you who do not know, I did used to work at MIT. I worked there for a couple of years. I worked with the PhD students. So I know very well about this fight. And honestly, I think they should have a union. They're not the first. Students at Harvard, graduate students, they were fighting for a union as well. They started that about a year ago, I believe. I'm going to explain to you why they're fighting for this. But first, I want you to see the video. So give me just a second. Boop, boop, be doop. Despite the fact that doobie doobie doo. Okay. And I do want to let you know ahead of time, this was actually shared by Bernie Sanders. And no, I am not here to cheer on Bernie Sanders. I want to make that very clear. I'm just here to talk about this issue about these students getting a union. So I just want to make that clear for some people that are like, oh no, Sal just praising Bernie. Nope, I'm not praising Bernie Sanders. I think his time has come and gone. I think he's a day, what is it? A day late, a dollar short, day late, something like that. He's late. Just let's put it that way. But listen to this video.
MIT has, despite the fact that MIT has this $27 billion endowment, the average MIT student still pays 55% of their income on rent.
People don't always realize that graduate students are actually workers. It's a job like any other.
MIT has an endowment of $27 billion. That's a B. They should not be exploiting the teachers who are interacting with thousands of their students and who are helping to make MIT the great university that it is.
Around 40% of MIT graduate students live on on-campus housing. So MIT gets to decide both how much they're paying us as the employer and also how much we're paying back to them in rent. They're both the employer and the landlord.
I expected a world-class education when I came to MIT, but I unfortunately found that a lot of the workload of teaching was actually put on TAs so unfairly because they're expected to continue doing their normal research in addition to teaching.
I strongly support the United Electrical Workers organizing effort at MIT. Graduate students at MIT, like all other workers in America, are entitled to decent wages, decent benefits, and decent schedules. And the only way they're going to get it is through a union.
I want to make sure that student workers who do have these issues with their advisors, who are facing harassment or who are being worked overtime consistently, have a proper grievance procedure. And that's something that I'm really hoping that our union can help facilitate.
Grad student workers face needless barriers every day to pursuing MIT's purported research and educational missions.
Since we've been working towards our union election, MIT has sent out constant emails trying to scare people out of voting yes, trying to confuse people about what it means to be in a union.
MIT seems to be more committed to building these luxury housing units rather than making housing that's affordable for graduate students. I've heard many stories of stressing about rent to the degree of I'm going to ration food every month in order to make my rent.
We can really be in a good, strong position to win this union election, which is actually upcoming on April 4th and 5th.
Good luck on your organizing effort.
Okay, I'm going to walk through this and I'm going to break some things down for you. But first and foremost, before I do that, I have to say this. Having worked at MIT, I have to say that I am incredibly disappointed with MIT. Incredibly disappointed. Out of all the universities that I've worked at, that was actually the best one to work at, believe it or not. Believe it or not. And working in higher ed is not really that fun. But they do have a strong community at MIT, not just amongst the students, but amongst the staff, the faculty, and the students. It's one big community. Now let's go into this video again, and I'm going to break some things down for you. So the first thing you notice here is despite the fact that MIT has a $27 billion endowment, let me explain to you what that means. In the state of Massachusetts, MIT and Harvard have the largest endowments. That means that people donate a lot of money to those institutions. And I don't mean everyday Joe Schmoes like you and me. I mean people who are CEOs. I mean people who own football teams like Robert Kraft. I mean people like Mike Bloomberg, Jeffrey Epstein, hello, Bill Gates, those kind of people. Some of the people that have graduated from MIT have created patents. So these people have a lot of money. So they get a lot of money from donors. They also get a lot of money from grants, research grants. So I worked with the PhD students, and I want to explain to you what they mean when they say the graduate students are workers. It is a tricky spot to be in because, yes, you are a student, you do have to attend classes, but at the same time, you also have to do research for these faculty members in their labs. What does that look like? Let me tell you. Imagine going to class from 8 to noon and then taking a quick lunch break. And then immediately after that, going into these labs and doing research for these professors and staying there till 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. Then you have to go back home to your dorm or your apartment. And then you have to do your homework, or they call them problem sets at MIT. You have to do your problem sets. After that long shift that you just did, you have to get all of that done. And then you have to get back up in the morning and go back to class. What I often saw, especially the freshmen, or excuse me, not the freshmen, the first year graduate students, because they're still getting used to everything and they haven't learned how to manage their time. And there's a lot that's required from them, right? Oftentimes what I saw, some of these students weren't even sleeping. They were pulling all-nighters. In fact, that was like a bragging point, by the way. Students would brag to each other like, yeah, well, I've been awake for 3 days. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating. And it got to the point where me, as someone who was their coordinator, their advisor, I had to tell them, you need to go home and go to sleep. It is not healthy to be awake multiple hours like that in a row and not getting any kind of sleep. Your body will give out on you. They would just continue to drink coffee to keep them up, just so they could that's just to get the work done. That's not so they can spend time with their girlfriend or boyfriend. That's not so they can hang out with their friends. That's not so they can go to the movies. That was just to get the work done. And it was known that you do not complain about the workload to your research professor or to the professors in the class, because then you will be seen as, oh, you're not tough enough and smart enough for MIT. Maybe you don't belong here. And it happens. And so you have a lot of these students, they are coming from undergraduate schools where they were used to being number one in their class. And then they get to MIT and all of a sudden they start to have, what is it called? Imposter syndrome. Because now they're not number one anymore. They're at a school where everybody was the smartest in their class. And so there's a lot of competition and the work is really hard. And so you'll have students that were used to getting straight A's. All of a sudden, they don't understand why they got a C on an exam. And instead of understanding what I just explained to you, a lot of times the students would blame themselves. MIT has a high depression rate amongst students. A lot of people don't know about this. MIT also has a pretty high suicide rate among students. Every month, I got an email from the university about another student committing suicide because the students beat themselves up because for the first time in their life, they're not number one. And sometimes they don't know how to handle that. That's part of it. Another part of it is the abuse. There's a lot of verbal abuse from some of these faculty members, not all of them, but from some of them. There's some I've seen some things that if I had a parent at that school, I would tell my kid, let's go. You're not going to the school anymore. It is a way for faculty to get cheap labor. Let me tell you what they're paying these kids. Keep in mind, this is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Massachusetts is very expensive. So the way this works, if you're a PhD student, you either get a fellowship, a research assistantship, or you get a teaching assistantship. They're all ships. The stipend amount that you get, it's generally the same across the board amongst the students. When I was there, I don't know what the rate is now, but when I was there, they were paying those students like $34,000 a year. Now, if you're like in South Carolina, that'll work out for you. That does not go anywhere really here in Boston, Massachusetts. So a lot of times these students, if they couldn't get housing on campus, it's hard to get housing on campus, by the way. I just want to let you know that. That's actually difficult for graduate students because there's not as much housing on campus for grad students. So most of the kids have to live off campus. Some of these kids had like 5 roommates. I'm talking not living a healthy life. I'm just going to be honest with you. Like their parents didn't have money. They're not really living a healthy life. I'm talking 5 roommates in a 3-bedroom apartment where someone has a mattress on the floor. I used to try to do as many social events as I could for them to give them food because once you pay for the rent, you don't have that much left for food. So sometimes like students would come to these events and they would get to-go containers and they would take food to go. And that was when it really hit me. These kids don't have any money. These kids are working 12 hours, 14 hours, 16 hours a day, and this is all they're paying them. And some of them can't afford to buy food. So some people didn't like that. They didn't like that I let the kids take food to go. I'm like, no, what are you going to do with the food? We're going to throw it away anyway, right? Let them take the food home. So I'm going to play a little bit of this and I'm going to chime in. Here we go.
Despite the fact that MIT has this $27 billion endowment, the average MIT student still pays 55% of their income on rent.
People don't always realize that graduate students are actually workers. It's a job like any other.
MIT has an endowment of $27 billion. That's a B. They should not be exploiting the teachers who are interacting with thousands of their students and who are.
I'm going to chime in here because I want to explain something to you. Where does all that money go, right? Some of you are wondering that, right? Let's break it down. You have people working at MIT that are making a lot of money. A lot of money. The faculty, especially if they're tenure faculty, the faculty are making a lot of money. You have people there that are financial coordinators, financial officers. They handle the money. They handle the grants that come in for the students, all that kind of stuff. If you come in as a financial assistant, you get promoted, you become a coordinator, then you become an officer, then a senior officer, then an administrative officer. That's pretty much the highest you can go on that. Some of those administrative officers are making like 6 figures. I kid you not. I kid you not. They're making a lot of money. Then you have to think about all the money that goes into the research, the labs, just to keep things running. A lot of money comes into MIT. This is all they can afford to pay the kids. Now, there are restrictions and guidelines too, and this is a big part of the problem. If you come in and you got a fellowship from the NIH, National Institute of Health, there's like maximum and minimum that they can give you from as an NIH grant. It's important that people understand that. So if you get a fellowship and you get that NIH grant, even if the city that you live in, if the cost of living is high, you're only going to get so much money from that grant as a stipend. That's how it works. And this is why I tell people, if you want to do a PhD, try not to do it in a city that is expensive. Because people tend to think this. They think that, oh, if I go do this PhD in Boston, or if I go do this PhD in NYC, my stipend is going to be so much higher. Nah, bud. No. So basically, to make a long story short, these students are at the mercy of these professors, these research professors. Let me explain to you how it works. You come in your first year, you figure out which area you want to work in. So I was in the physics department, right? And I've also been in the engineering department. You come into the physics department and you decide, you know what? I think I want to do astrophysics. Or you may decide you want to do, quantum. If you decide you want to do astrophysics, then you have to start reaching out to faculty that work in that focus area to get them to pick you up, to put you on their team. That's how it works. It's not always easy to do. Sometimes students are rejected. Some faculty members are like, yeah, I'm not feeling you. You're not going to be on my team. I'm just being honest. So then you get a research professor. They put you on their team. Kudos. Your first step is complete. Now you have to work for the professor. Majority of the time, it is the students that are doing the bulk load of the work. And when there is a discovery, and discoveries happen at MIT, and it's in that professor's research group, you know who ends up getting all the credit for it? Guess. The professor. But the students are the ones that are doing the bulk load of the work. They're not paid what the professor is paid, excuse me. I can tell you that much. The professor's not there with them in the research labs till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. A lot of times those students are alone. And I've said this as well. I don't think it's safe for these kids to be walking back from these labs on campus at 2 o'clock in the morning by themselves. Yes, you're on a college campus, but honey, you are still in the city. Theft happens. Crime happens. So it's too much for these kids. And I've watched some of them burn themselves out. Now, some of them make it. And imagine you got to do this for 5 to 7 years. It's not like you do this for a year or two. This is 5 to 7 year commitment. And some people don't make it. And some people push themselves because they don't want to be shamed if they don't make it and they just accept the masters. These kids are some of the brightest kids I've ever met. I'll tell you, they know so much, but they're given so little. I do not think it is fair that these faculty members get to overwork these students like this in these labs, get to disrespect them. Now, not all faculty, but get to disrespect them, get to degrade them, belittle them in front of their peers. And these kids are paid so little, and then they have to go to class the next day. Let's go back into the video.
Helping to make MIT the great university that it is.
Around 40% of MIT graduate students live on-campus housing. So MIT gets to decide both how much they're paying us as the employer and also how much we're paying back to them in rent. They're both the employer and the landlord.
I expected a world-class education when I came to MIT, but I unfortunately found that a lot of the workload of teaching was actually put on TAs so unfairly because they're expected to continue doing their normal research in addition to teaching.
I want to comment on that for just a second. For people who don't understand how this works, I want to break this down for you. Research is more important at MIT than teaching. So you can be a phenomenal instructor, but if your research isn't there, you won't get tenure. That's just how it works. So what happens is a lot of times, especially the senior faculty, they're at a point where they don't really teach. They have TAs and the TAs teach for them. What I found to be kind of strange, when I was in college, we had TAs. They didn't teach every class though. They would teach here and there. They would help grade papers, right? Grade exams, but they weren't our primary teacher. What I noticed at MIT, it seemed like the TAs, again, they were doing the bulk load when it came to the teaching. And so I'm like, if the students are doing the teaching and the students are doing most of the research workload, what exactly are the faculty members doing? Go back into the video.
Strongly support the United Electrical Workers organizing effort at MIT. Graduate students at MIT, like all other workers in America, are entitled to decent wages, decent benefits, and decent schedules. And the only way they're going to get it is through a union.
I want to make sure that student workers who do have these issues with their advisors, who are facing harassment or who are being worked overtime consistently.
Did you hear what he just said about harassment and being worked overtime? That's what I was just telling you about. I'm glad these students are speaking out about this, because oftentimes these situations would not be reported, and the few who tried to report them, let's just say they're no longer at the university. It's a problem. Yes, there is harassment. Yes, there is abusive behavior. It's not, as a staff member, for me, my experience as staff and their experience as students, it was very different. And the type of, again, the belittling that they would face from some of these faculty members. Some of the things I heard them say to these students, just so disrespectful, so nasty, so mean. So I'm glad they're speaking out about this, because people need to know about it. So go back in.
Have a proper grievance procedure. And that's something that I'm really hoping that our union can help facilitate.
Grad student workers face needless barriers every day to pursuing MIT's purported research and educational missions.
Since we've been working towards our union election, MIT has sent out constant emails trying to scare people out of voting yes, trying to confuse people about what it means to be in a union.
MIT seems to be more committed to building these luxury housing units rather than making housing that's affordable for graduate students. I've heard many stories of stressing about rent to the degree of I'm going to ration food every month in order to make my rent.
We can really
Remember what I was telling you about the food, about the kids coming to get the free food? It's a big problem. It's a big problem. But she's right. They're more invested in building these luxury apartment buildings instead of affordable housing. It's expensive to live in Cambridge. And the MIT area of Cambridge, that actually used to be the more affordable area to live in. That actually was not a safe area many years ago. But now, forget it. Forget it.
really be in a good, strong position to win this union election, which is actually upcoming on April 4th and 5th.
Good luck on your organizing effort.
So this is coming up in a couple of days for them to vote on this. And you heard in the video, they said the university is sending out emails to scare students to not try to do this. That's coming from the, oh my God. Those are administrators sending out those emails. Isn't that terrible? You have a $27 billion investment and you don't want to give these kids an actual schedule, a work schedule, because they want to continue to exploit them, abuse them, and use them. This goes back to capitalism. This is what happens. This is why I tell people it does not work. Because even if you have a few professors that are not that way, that are genuine, sincere, and don't overwork their students, the problem is you always have some that are willing to abuse them, that are willing to overwork them. That is the problem. And as long as you have that, and you have the people at the bottom that can be exploited and can be used and abused, it will happen. It's 2022. And I'm glad that these students are finally speaking out about this, because I saw this myself. A lot of people want to go to MIT, but they don't know what actually goes on at MIT. You don't know that until you get in and you say yes. But these students, these kids shouldn't have to deal with this. No student should have to deal with this. And I'll say here today, I believe that grad students should have a union. It prevents you from having students working till 2:00 in the morning and then having to turn around and go to class a couple hours later. It prevents that. It prevents you having students sleeping in the labs. It prevents that. Right now, those students have no rights. And I'm going to go ahead and let you know, if you're an international student, it's even worse for you. Because the international students, they know they got to do everything that they're told to do. Otherwise, they may have to go back home. And there are a lot of international students at MIT. So just think about how they're exploited. So this is something that needs to change within higher ed. And I've been very vocal about it. And I hope that they get the union. She said April 4th and April 5th. So hopefully that happens. But this is what I was telling you guys about higher education. I've been doing this for years. And I know, like, it's not any better at Boston University either. They do the same thing. They exploit these kids. These are wealthy schools. These are not state schools. They have the money. I'm going to go to some of the comments in the chat. Scooby-Dooby-Doo. Well, I did pick a comment here. The Traveler. Sabby, aren't those endowments also tax-free too, and said money is being spent outside of education? Yes, so MIT is tax-free. And what that means is that I, for example, had a credit card to do these events for students. So I found it was cheaper to do a lot of these events off campus than it was on campus. Just being honest, because campus catering company Aramark is actually more expensive than taking the kids over to the Friendly Toast, right? So when you have that card, on the card, it says tax-free. So we didn't even have to pay taxes. Like, I could take them out to eat. We went to Fenway Park. We did a Fenway Park tour. We don't pay no taxes. Thank you for bringing that up. John said, Sabby, what did you major in? I majored in broadcast journalism and English. And then I went to grad school for higher ed administration. Welcome, John. Sorry, I thought I was going to grab one here. Tony Plow. Sabby studied broadcast journalism. Yep, I did. Sebastian says higher education equals MLM pyramid scheme. Yeah, buddy. Yes. Talk about it. Jonathan said, now it makes sense why they accept so many foreign students and they include them in their diversity reports. They wonder why they don't have enough African-American grad students. Yep, 100%. Yep. Yeah, the international students, like I feel bad for all the students, but for the international students, especially if you're dealing with a mental health issue, I always felt bad for them as well, because the first thing that comes to their mind is, if I don't do this, they're going to send me back home. When you're here on a student visa, there's so many restrictions. Like, it's crazy. All right, Super Patriot, free college now. Woohoo! That's right, Super Patriot. We need it. We need it. And I told you guys where the money's coming from. Like, these are big name people like Robert Kraft, Bill Gates, like the people that are donating to these schools. You would be surprised. You would be surprised. Let's see. Cloudy skies. American universities see international students, particularly Chinese students, as a piggy bank because they're mostly full pay. 100%. But if I'm trying to remember, even our students that came from China still were offered either a fellowship or a research assistantship. Everybody was offered some kind of ship. I'm just being honest. But in reference to undergrad, you're right. Like, I'll explain that to people really quick for those who don't know. If you are an international student and you're trying to go to MIT or Harvard or Boston University, I only know about it with those schools in particular. Your parents actually have to show proof that they can cover your tuition for 4 years. That's for undergrad. Because international students coming here for undergrad, they don't qualify for financial aid. Like, they can't, because they're international students. So they have to show the proof. But yes, that is true. Like, for the undergrad, a lot of those students, especially at BU, their parents have money. But when it comes to PhD, you have to end up in a research lab at some point. Like, that's the whole thing with the PhD. You have to go work for a professor at some point. So they give you those like stipends, and it's a way for faculty to get cheap labor. I'm just going to be honest. That's what it's all about. And I've seen some of my students, like, they'll graduate with a PhD and they don't even end up using it. 5 to 7 years, and they realize, I don't want to. And I'll tell you this, and I'm running close on my time because I do have to get going. I want to say this very closely to anyone thinking about doing a PhD. If you want to get a PhD and you are not going to go into academia, do not get a PhD. Just get a master's. For example, if you want to be a computer scientist or you want to go into tech field, but you also want to get your master's, higher education. Some people make this mistake and they think they need to get a PhD, but they don't want to go in academia. They want to go work in industry. And I had students that had this happen to them. I'm like, why are you getting a PhD if you want to go work in industry? This is more so for people who want to work in academia. And then they can graduate with their PhD. They're offered a postdoc appointment, which, by the way, they don't make much either. There are postdocs here in Boston working at these universities making like $45,000 a year. That's nothing here. That's nothing. You got a PhD and they're paying you like $45,000 a year. Just keeping it real. So if you want to do that and you want more education, if you want to go into industry, don't do that. Just go into industry after undergrad. And then if you decide you want to get a master's or more schooling, let your company help pay for it or reimburse you for it. If some companies are still even doing that now. But don't go the PhD route if you want to go work in industry. That's my big tip that I would give you. I've seen students make that mistake and then they get frustrated because they spent all these years on a PhD and then they decide they want to go work for Microsoft or they want to go work for Google or Facebook. And Google and Facebook don't really care about your PhD. They just want to see that you can do the work. So just a tip for you guys. I am past my time. I do want to let you know, if you want to see more Sabby, you can check me out at 8 p.m. in 1 hour. Actually, I'll be on my channel, Sabby Sabs. What did I do here? I shared the wrong screen. Tonight, I do have a guest coming on tonight. So I have a couple things I'm going to talk about. Matt Taibbi, cancel culture. I'm going to talk about that tonight. AOC roasted by Crystal, although I have some things to say about Crystal in that exchange as well. I don't buy it. And then Ted Glick is going to join tonight. He was a third-party candidate for New Jersey Senate. He's an activist. He's a writer. He was progressive long before it was popular to be progressive. So he's been doing a lot of activism. So he's going to come on tonight as well. And then at 9 p.m., the call-in segment of my show will start. So if you don't have the app Call-In, definitely download that if you want to call into the show. That's always a fun time. I really like talking to you guys. So looking forward to that. All right, guys, that is it. That is my time. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.